They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes the people who share your blood are the only ones who'll spill theirs for you. My name is Laura, and I'm telling this story from a place I never thought I'd be, watching from beyond as my father became something I never knew he could be. Something terrifying. Something justified. The morning I left for what should have been the best weekend of my life, I danced barefoot across our kitchen tiles in Decatur, Georgia. My honey-colored curls bounced as I spun, reaching for my favorite coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle that Dad always threatened to throw away. My bright pink duffel bag leaned against our kitchen counter, stuffed with clothes I'd picked out specifically for my travel blog footage. This wasn't just a girl's trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains. This was my shot at finally building something real, a travel channel, a creative life, maybe even enough followers to help Dad retire from his mechanic job. I'd been planning content ideas for weeks, charging my camera equipment, writing scripts in my journal late at night. My dad, Thomas Mitchell, watched me from the doorway. 53 years old, calloused hands, silver threading through his dark hair, and eyes that held 11 years of single parenthood since Mom died of breast cancer. He'd raised me alone, worked double shifts at Mitchell's Auto Repair, and never once made me feel like I was missing anything. But I could see the worry lines creasing his forehead as I zipped my bag shut. Not because he didn't trust me, I was 22, responsible, the kind of daughter who called when she said she would. His worry came from somewhere deeper, some instinct that fathers develop when they've spent years being the only thing standing between their child and a world that doesn't always play fair. "You sure about these girls?" he asked quietly, adjusting the strap on my camera bag. He'd met Victoria, Samantha, and Isabel maybe 3 times total. They were the type who showed up loud, posted everything, and always seemed to be performing their friendship rather than living it. "Dad, they're fine," I laughed, grabbing my keys as my phone buzzed with messages. The group chat was already active, Victoria posting mirror selfies, Samantha complaining about traffic, Isabel making jokes about how we better not get murdered in the mountains. That joke would haunt me later. Dad helped me carry my bags to the porch. Our little house in Decatur felt warm in the morning light, the kind of place where neighbors waved and kids rode bikes in circles. Safe. Predictable. Everything the mountains wouldn't be. "Call me when you get there," he said, like he had every time I'd left the house since I was 16. "I always do," I smiled, kissing his cheek. He smelled like motor oil and the coffee he'd been drinking since 5 a.m. A silver Honda Pilot pulled into our driveway, music thumping through the windows. Victoria honked twice, and I could see all 3 of them inside, sunglasses on despite the early hour, already recording themselves singing along to whatever was playing. I grabbed my bags and headed toward the car, but something made me turn back. Dad stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Like he was memorizing the moment. "I love you, baby girl," he called out. "Love you too, Dad." The car door slammed shut, and we pulled away. I waved through the back window until our house disappeared around the corner. In the passenger seat, Victoria was already going live on Instagram, narrating our departure like we were celebrities heading to a premiere. "Road trip with my girls," she squealed into her phone camera. "Laura's finally doing her travel blog thing, so you'll better follow her." I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with something else, nervousness maybe. These weren't my closest friends. They were the kind of girls who'd started including me in things after I got into UGA's communications program, after my Instagram started gaining followers, after I became useful to their image. But I pushed that thought away. I was 22, finally ready to chase my dreams, and I had my camera charged and ready to capture every moment of what I thought would be the perfect weekend. The mountains were calling, and I was ready to answer. I had no idea I was driving toward my own death. The cabin sat perched on a ridge overlooking the Chattahoochee National Forest, all rustic wood and floor-to-ceiling windows that promised stunning sunrise shots for my blog. Victoria had found it on some influencer's recommendation, remote enough to feel adventurous, connected enough to keep the Wi-Fi working for our content. For the first few hours, everything felt perfect. We unpacked our bags, claimed our beds, and I set up my camera equipment while the others mixed drinks and played music. The plan was simple: spend the weekend hiking, filming, and creating the kind of content that would launch my travel channel into something real. But as the sun started setting behind the mountains, something shifted. It started small. Victoria making little comments about my outfit choices. "Are you sure you want to wear that hoodie in your videos, Laura? It's a little basic." Samantha laughing when I pulled out my tripod. "Girl, you're being way too serious about this whole blogger thing." I tried to laugh it off, but there was an edge to their voices that hadn't been there in the car. Like now that we were alone, miles from civilization, they could drop whatever act they'd been performing back home. Isabel, who'd been quiet most of the day, finally spoke up during dinner. "Can I ask you something, Laura? Do you really think this whole travel blog thing is going to work out? Like, realistically?" The question hit wrong. Sharp. Designed to cut. "What do you mean?" I asked, setting down my fork. "I mean, there are like millions of travel bloggers already. What makes you think you're special?" Victoria snorted into her wine glass. "Right? Like, no offense, but you've never even been anywhere exciting. What are you gonna blog about? The Waffle House on Highway 78? They all laughed. Not the supportive laughter of friends sharing a joke, but something meaner. Something that made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm just starting out," I said quietly. "Everyone has to start somewhere." "Sure," Samantha said, refilling her glass. "But some people are just more naturally made for this stuff, you know? Like, you're sweet, Laura, but you're not really influencer material." The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt something crack inside my chest, not just hurt, but confusion. These were supposed to be my friends. These were the girls who'd convinced me to plan this trip, who'd hyped up my blog idea, who'd made me believe they wanted to support my dreams. "Why did you even invite me then?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Because you have a car and your dad paid for half the cabin," Victoria said with a shrug, like it was obvious. The room went silent except for the crackling fireplace and the distant sound of wind through the trees. I stared at them, these girls I'd called friends, who I'd trusted enough to drive 3 hours into the mountains with, who I'd shared my biggest dreams with. "You know what?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I'm going for a walk." "Laura, don't be dramatic," Samantha called after me. "We're just being honest. Isn't that what friends do?" I grabbed my jacket and phone, not trusting myself to respond. Outside, the mountain air was crisp and clean, nothing like the poisonous atmosphere inside the cabin. I walked down the gravel path that led toward the hiking trails, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "How's the trip going, baby girl? Having fun with your friends?" I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. How could I tell him that his little girl was 3 hours away from home with people who saw her as nothing more than a convenient way to split expenses? That everything I'd been excited about, the content creation, the adventure, the friendship, had been a lie? I typed back, "It's great, Dad. Love you." Some lies are meant to protect the people we love. That one would be my last. Behind me, I could hear laughter from the cabin. Loud, careless laughter that carried across the stillness of the mountains. They weren't worried about me. They weren't coming to check if I was okay. They were probably already planning tomorrow's activities that I was apparently just funding, not actually invited to enjoy. The trail stretched ahead of me, disappearing into shadows between the trees. I thought about calling Dad, asking him to come get me. But that would mean admitting that I'd misjudged everything, that I was still just a naive girl who couldn't tell the difference between friends and users. Instead, I walked deeper into the woods, needing space to think, to breathe, to figure out how I'd gotten everything so wrong. The darkness closed around me like a blanket, and somewhere in the distance, I could still hear them laughing. I should have turned back then. I should have swallowed my pride, packed my bags, and driven home to Dad's worried hugs and understanding silence. Instead, I kept walking, and that decision would change everything. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with mist clinging to the mountains like secrets nobody wanted to tell. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning while replaying every cruel word from the night before. When I finally emerged from my room, Victoria, Samantha, and Isabel were already in the kitchen, sharing some inside joke that died the moment they saw me. "Morning sunshine," Victoria said with fake sweetness. "Sleep okay?" I poured myself coffee without answering. The tension from last night hadn't evaporated, it had crystallized into something harder, more deliberate. They watched me move around the kitchen like predators studying prey, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt genuinely afraid. "So," Samantha said, lounging against the counter in her matching pajama set, "we were thinking we'd do some hiking today. There's this trail that leads to a waterfall, super Instagrammable." "Perfect for your little blog project," Isabel added, but her tone made it clear she thought my project was anything but perfect. I nodded, trying to project normalcy. "Sounds good. Let me grab my camera equipment." "Actually," Victoria interrupted, "maybe leave the heavy gear behind today? We want to do some serious hiking, and all that equipment will just slow us down." Something cold settled in my stomach. It's not that heavy. And I came here specifically to film content. "Laura," Samantha said, stepping closer. "We're trying to help you. Trust us." But I didn't trust them. Not anymore. Every instinct Dad had tried to teach me about reading people, about recognizing when something wasn't right, was screaming warnings I couldn't ignore. We set out an hour later, following a trail that wound deeper into the Chattahoochee National Forest. The path was well marked at first, with wooden signs and clear directions. But as we walked, Victoria kept suggesting shortcuts that led us further from the main trail. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked when we'd been walking for over an hour with no sign of a waterfall. "Relax," Victoria laughed. "We know where we're going." But they didn't. Or maybe they did, and that was the problem. The shortcuts became more frequent, the path less defined. Trees pressed closer together, blocking out the weak morning sun. My phone showed no signal bars, and when I mentioned it, Isabel just shrugged. "That's kind of the point, isn't it? Digital detox and all that." Another hour passed. Then another. The conversation died as we walked, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that felt intentional. They kept whispering among themselves, sharing looks I wasn't meant to understand. "Hey," I called out when they'd gotten several yards ahead of me. "Can we take a break? I need some water." They stopped, but something in their posture had changed. The fake friendliness from earlier was gone, replaced by something colder. More honest. "You know what, Laura?" Victoria turned around, and her smile was sharp enough to cut. "We've been talking, and we think you need to learn something about yourself." "What are you talking about?" "You're too trusting," Samantha said, stepping closer. "Too naive. Too willing to believe that people actually want you around." "It's kind of pathetic, honestly," Isabel added. "The way you just believe everything. Like, did you really think we wanted to be your friends?" The words hit like physical blows. "Stop it. We're doing you a favor," Victoria continued. "Teaching you a lesson about the real world. About how it feels when people leave you behind." "What lesson?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed me a video she'd recorded earlier, me sleeping in my bed, mouth slightly open, hair messy. The caption read, "When your friend doesn't realize she's just the designated driver." "We've been documenting this whole trip," Samantha explained. "All your desperate attempts to fit in. All your sad little dreams about being an influencer. It's going to make amazing content." "Delete that," I said, reaching for the phone. Victoria pulled it back. "I don't think so. This is what happens when you're delusional enough to think you belong with us. They started walking again, faster now, like they had somewhere specific to be. I followed, but my legs felt weak. Everything was wrong. The trail, their behavior, the way they kept checking their phones like they were following some kind of script. Where are we going? I called out. Somewhere you can learn to find your own way, Isabel said without turning around. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't a hiking trip. This wasn't a friendship retreat. This was something else entirely, something planned, something cruel, something designed to break me down in the most isolated place they could find. The trees seemed to close in around us as we walked deeper into the wilderness, further from help, further from safety. My phone was dead now, my water running low, and the girls who'd promised me adventure were leading me towards something that felt like a trap. Please, I said, but they didn't slow down. They were done pretending to be my friends. Now they were going to show me exactly what they thought I deserved. The sun was already setting when they stopped walking. We'd been hiking for hours, and I'd lost all sense of direction. The trail had disappeared completely, replaced by rough terrain and thick underbrush that caught at my clothes and scraped my skin. My legs ached, my water bottle was empty, and the temperature was dropping fast. This looks like a good spot, Victoria announced, dropping her backpack near a cluster of rocks. I looked around. There was nothing special about this place. No waterfall, no scenic viewpoint, nothing worth hiking 6 hours to see. Just trees and shadows and the growing darkness of a mountain night. Good spot for what? I asked. The three of them exchanged looks. In the dying light, their faces looked different, harder, more focused. Like actors who'd finally dropped their performance. Laura, Samantha said, pulling out her phone. We need you to understand something. This whole trip has been about teaching you a lesson. What lesson? That you don't matter, Isabel said simply. That your little dreams are stupid, your blog idea is pathetic, and your friendship isn't worth anything to anyone. Victoria started recording. Say hi to the camera, Laura. Tell everyone how it feels to realize your friends never actually liked you. I stepped back, my heart hammering. Stop recording me. Why? Isn't this what you wanted? Content for your channel. Delete it. Right now. Victoria laughed. Or what? You'll tell your daddy on us. The mockery in her voice when she mentioned Dad made something snap inside me. Don't talk about my father. Ah, Daddy's girl is getting upset, Samantha cooed. What's he gonna do from 3 hours away? I lunged for Victoria's phone, but she pulled it back and I stumbled, catching myself against a tree. The bark scraped my palm, drawing blood. Careful, Isabel said. Wouldn't want you to get hurt out here. So far from help. Something in her tone made ice form in my veins. What is this really about? This is about you learning your place, Victoria said, still recording. You're not one of us, Laura. You never were. You're just some small-town mechanic's daughter who thought she could play with the big girls. We let you hang around because you were useful, Samantha added. Your car, your dad's money, your pathetic eagerness to please everyone. But we're done pretending to like you. The phone camera stayed trained on my face, capturing every moment of my humiliation. I could see myself on the screen, disheveled, scared, alone in the growing darkness. Please, I whispered. Just stop. Stop what? Telling you the truth. Victoria stepped closer. The truth is that nobody actually cares about you, Laura. Your blog will fail, your dreams are ridiculous, and the only reason anyone tolerates you is because you're too stupid to realize when you're not wanted. Tears started streaming down my face, and I hated myself for crying in front of them. For giving them this reaction. For being everything they said I was, naive, pathetic, desperately wanting to belong. Now, Isabel said, checking her phone, we're going to play a little game. It's called Find Your Own Way Home. What? We're leaving, Samantha explained casually, like she was discussing dinner plans. You can follow the trail back to the cabin. If you can find it. My blood turned to ice water. You can't leave me here. I don't know the way back. That's kind of the point, Victoria said. Think of it as character development. A learning experience. It's getting dark. I don't have a flashlight. Should have thought of that before you decided to be such a pathetic wannabe, Isabel shrugged. They started gathering their backpacks, moving with the efficiency of people who'd planned this moment. I realized with growing horror that they'd never intended to hike back together. They'd brought me here specifically to abandon me. Please don't do this, I begged. I'm sorry if I did something wrong. I'm sorry if I annoyed you. Just please don't leave me here. Victoria held up her phone, still recording. Look at her begging. This is perfect content. For what? Our channel, Samantha grinned. Fake friend prank goes wrong. It's going to be hilarious. This isn't a prank, I said, my voice breaking. This is dangerous. Dangerous for you maybe, Isabel said. But we know exactly where we are. We'll be back at the cabin in an hour. While you spend the night learning about consequences, Victoria added. They started walking away, leaving me standing alone in the rapidly darkening forest. I ran after them, stumbling over roots and rocks. Wait. Please. I'll do anything. I'll delete all my social media. I'll transfer schools. Just don't leave me here. But they didn't stop. They just kept walking, their flashlights bobbing in the distance, their laughter echoing off the trees. We'll send help in the morning. Victoria called back. If you survive that long. And then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness, leaving me alone with nothing but the sound of wind through the branches and my own terrified breathing. The temperature was dropping fast. I had no flashlight, no map, no idea which direction led back to safety. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, full of shadows and sounds I couldn't identify. I pulled out my phone, praying for even one bar of signal. Nothing. For the first time since leaving home, I thought about Dad. About how he'd worry when I didn't call. About how he'd trusted me to come home safe. About how I might never see him again. The night in the mountains was the longest of my life. I tried to find my way back using the stars, but clouds kept rolling in, and every direction looked the same in the darkness. I stumbled through underbrush that tore at my clothes, fell into ditches that bruised my knees, and listened to sounds I couldn't identify echoing through the trees. When I finally couldn't walk anymore, I found a large oak tree and curled up against its base, shivering in my inadequate jacket. The temperature had dropped into the 40s, and every breath felt like ice in my lungs. But the cold wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the recording. Before Victoria had walked away with her phone, before they'd left me alone in the dark, she'd made sure to capture every moment of my breakdown. Every tear, every plea, every desperate word as I begged them not to abandon me. And as I sat there in the dark, I realized something that made my blood run even colder than the mountain air. They'd planned this. All of it. The remote location, the hours of hiking, the timing that would leave me stranded overnight. This wasn't a spontaneous prank gone wrong. This was deliberate cruelty, designed for maximum humiliation and danger. They wanted me to suffer. They wanted me to break. And they wanted it all on camera. Around 3 a.m., I heard them coming back. Flashlights bounced between the trees, and I could hear their voices carrying on the wind. But they weren't coming to rescue me. They were coming to film the aftermath. Laura. Victoria called out in a fake worried voice. Oh my God, where are you? We've been looking everywhere. I stood up from behind the tree, my body stiff and aching from hours on the cold ground. I'm here. The flashlight swung toward me, and I could see their faces in the harsh light. They looked refreshed, well-rested. Like they'd spent the night warm and comfortable while I fought hypothermia. There you are. Samantha rushed toward me with theatrical concern. We were so worried. We got lost on the way back and couldn't find you. But her phone was recording. They all were. Are you okay? Isabel asked, but her eyes were focused on her screen, making sure she got the best angle of my disheveled appearance. I stared at them, and something inside me hardened. They weren't here because they were worried. They were here for more content. More footage of my humiliation. You left me here, I said quietly. No, Victoria shook her head. We got separated. We've been searching all night. You recorded yourself leaving me. That was just, we thought you were behind us. We didn't realize. The lies poured out of their mouths like water, smooth and practiced. But I could see the truth in their eyes. They were enjoying this. My pain, my fear, my desperation, it was all entertainment to them. Please, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. Just take me back to the cabin. I want to go home. Of course, Victoria said, still recording. But first, why don't you tell the camera how you're feeling? For your blog. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Even now, even after everything they'd put me through, they were still mocking my dreams. I just want to go home, I repeated. But we drove all this way, Samantha said. Don't you want to get some content first? Isn't that why you came? I looked at their faces, illuminated by the phone screens. There was no kindness there, no remorse, no recognition that they'd done something unforgivable. Just excitement about the footage they were getting. You're sick, I whispered. We're honest, Isabel corrected. This is who you really are, Laura. Weak. Pathetic. A victim. Victoria stepped closer, her camera capturing every detail of my tear-stained face. Say it. Tell everyone watching that you're a pathetic loser who doesn't deserve friends. No. Say it, or we leave you here again. The threat hung in the air between us. I looked around at the endless forest, at the darkness that had nearly killed me, at the phone cameras that were turning my nightmare into their entertainment. I'm going to tell people what you did, I said finally. Victoria laughed. Who's going to believe you? We have hours of footage showing you having a mental breakdown in the woods. We'll just say you got lost and we rescued you. My dad will believe me. Your dad, Samantha snorted. The mechanic who can barely afford to keep you in community college? What's he going to do? I thought about Dad, probably lying awake at home, worried because I hadn't called. He taught me to be strong, to stand up for myself, to never let anyone make me feel small. But right now, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Let's go, I said. They led me back through the forest, and this time the path was clear, well-marked, obvious. They'd known exactly where they were the whole time. The getting lost story was just another lie for their cameras. As we walked, they kept filming. My stumbling gait, my exhausted face, my complete humiliation. All of it would become content for whatever sick social media campaign they had planned. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was rising over the mountains. It should have been beautiful, the golden light filtering through the trees, the mist rising from the valleys below. Instead, it felt like a spotlight on my shame. Why don't you get cleaned up? Victoria suggested, still recording. You look rough. I went to the bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror. My hair was matted with leaves and dirt, my face was streaked with tears and scratches, my clothes were torn and stained. I looked exactly like what I was, a victim of their cruelty. But as I stared at my reflection, something changed. The despair in my eyes shifted into something harder. Something that looked almost like my father's determination when he was working on a difficult repair. They thought they'd broken me. They thought they'd created content that would humiliate me forever. They had no idea they'd just signed their own death warrants. The drive back to Decatur was the longest 3 hours of my life. Victoria drove while Samantha controlled the music and Isabel edited footage on her phone. They acted like nothing had happened, chatting about their plans for the week, discussing which clips to post first. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, saying nothing. Every few minutes, one of them would glance back at me and smirk. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully put me in my place, taught me a lesson about trying to rise above my station. They had no idea what they'd actually done. When we pulled into my driveway, Dad was waiting on the porch. Even from the car, I could see the worry lines etched deep around his eyes. I'd missed our nightly check-in call, something I'd never done before. "Thanks for the ride," I said quietly, grabbing my bag. "Laura," Victoria called as I opened the car door. "Don't forget to tag us when you post your hiking content. If you still plan to do that whole blog thing." The laughter that followed me out of the car was sharp and cold. Dad met me halfway up the walkway, and the moment I saw his face, I almost broke down again. He looked like he'd aged years in the 3 days I'd been gone. "Baby girl," he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like motor oil and safety. "You didn't call last night. I was worried sick." I held on to him tighter than I had since I was a child. "I'm sorry, Dad. My phone died." He pulled back to look at me, and I saw his expression change as he took in my appearance. The scratches on my face, the exhaustion in my eyes, the way I couldn't quite meet his gaze. "What happened?" "Nothing. Just tired from hiking." But Dad had been reading people for 53 years, and he'd been reading me for 22. He knew something was wrong. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you inside." I went straight to my room and collapsed on my bed, still wearing the clothes I'd slept in the dirt in. Dad brought me tea and toast, sat on the edge of my mattress, and waited. "You want to tell me what really happened up there?" I wanted to. God, I wanted to tell him everything. About the cruel words, the abandonment, the night alone in the forest, the cameras recording my humiliation. But shame kept the words locked in my throat. "Just friend drama," I whispered. "Must have been some drama to leave marks on your face." I touched the scratches from the branches, the evidence of my night stumbling through the dark. "I fell while hiking." Dad didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he also knew pushing wouldn't help right now. "Well," he said, standing up. "You're home safe. That's what matters." But I wasn't safe. Not really. Because somewhere in this house was a phone that Victoria had hidden, a phone containing footage that would destroy me if it ever got out. I waited until Dad went to bed before I started searching. It took me 3 hours, but I finally found it wedged behind storage boxes under my bed. The screen was cracked, the casing burned around the edges like someone had tried to destroy it but didn't finish the job. My hands shook as I powered it on. The video files were all there. Hours of footage from the trip, but not the sanitized version they'd planned to post. This was the raw footage. The real footage. Victoria laughing as she explained their plan to humiliate me. Samantha joking about how pathetic I was. Isabel suggesting they leave me overnight to teach me a lesson. And then there was the audio file from that night in the forest. My voice, weak and scared, whispering into the darkness about how I couldn't move my leg properly after falling, how I thought they might really leave me there to die. But the most damning part was what came after, their laughter as they walked away, their casual discussion of how long to wait before coming back, their excitement about the content they were creating. "This is going to be epic," Victoria's voice said clearly. "Rich girl puts poor girl in her place. The internet's going to eat this up." "Think she'll actually make it through the night?" Samantha asked. "Who cares?" Isabel laughed. "If something happens to her, that's even better content." I sat there in my childhood bedroom, listening to 3 people discuss my potential death like it was entertainment, and something inside me died. Not the good parts, my love for Dad, my dreams, my hope for the future. But the parts that believed in fairness, in karma, in the idea that good people are rewarded and bad people eventually face consequences. Those parts died completely. I thought about going to the police. I thought about posting the footage online, exposing what they'd really done. But I also thought about Victoria's family's lawyers, about how they'd spin the story, about how 3 rich girls would always be believed over one mechanic's daughter. Instead, I hid the phone back where I'd found it and went to Dad's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, still fully dressed, staring at a picture of Mom on his nightstand. "Dad." He looked up, and I saw my own pain reflected in his eyes. "Can't sleep either?" I sat down next to him. "They hurt me." His whole body went rigid. "Who hurt you?" "The girls. Victoria, Samantha, Isabel. They left me alone in the forest overnight. They filmed it. They wanted me to suffer." Dad's hands clenched into fists. "They what?" I told him everything. The cruel words, the abandonment, the night alone in the cold, the cameras capturing my humiliation. I watched his face change as I spoke, watched anger replace worry, watched something dangerous spark in his eyes. "Where are they now?" he asked quietly. "Home. They think it's funny, Dad. They think they won." Dad stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street where our neighbors slept peacefully in their beds. "No," he said finally. "They didn't win." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Something that made me think of wolves and winter storms and consequences that couldn't be bought off or explained away. "What are you going to do?" He turned back to me, and for a moment, he looked like a stranger. Like someone who could do things I'd never imagined my gentle, hard-working father was capable of. "I'm going to make sure they understand what happens when someone hurts my daughter." That was the last normal conversation we ever had. The first one to die was Victoria. It happened 3 weeks after the mountain trip, on a Thursday night in her family's penthouse in Buckhead. The official report said suicide, a young woman overcome with guilt, unable to live with what she'd done to her friend. But I knew better. Because Victoria wasn't the type to feel guilt, and she definitely wasn't the type to kill herself over someone like me. I found out about her death the way everyone else did, through social media. The posts started appearing around midnight, friends expressing shock, family members asking for privacy, news outlets picking up the story of a prominent Atlanta family's tragedy. By morning, it was everywhere. Influencer dies in apparent suicide. Guilt over friend's ordeal leads to tragic end. The dark side of social media culture. But there were details that didn't make sense. Victoria had been found on her balcony, 19 floors up, but security footage showed her alone in her apartment all evening. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. Just a message written on her bathroom mirror in red lipstick: "Fake friends deserve consequences." The phrase sent chills through anyone who'd been following our story online. Because by then, word had gotten out about what really happened on the mountain. Not the sanitized version Victoria and her friends had planned to post, but the truth. Someone had leaked the real footage. It started with anonymous posts on Reddit, then spread to Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Raw clips of Victoria laughing as she explained their plan to humiliate me. Audio of them discussing whether I'd survive the night alone in the forest. Video of me begging them not to leave me, and their cruel laughter in response. The internet erupted. #JusticeForLaura began trending. People who'd never met me were posting reaction videos, their faces twisted with rage and disgust. Parents shared photos of their own daughters with captions like, "If someone did this to my child, I would end them." The footage was damning. Undeniably evil. There was no way to spin abandoning someone overnight in a dangerous forest as a harmless prank. Victoria's family tried damage control, hiring crisis PR firms and threatening lawsuits. But you can't contain viral outrage, especially when the evidence is so clear, so cruel, so unforgivable. And then Victoria died, and suddenly no one was talking about lawsuits anymore. I watched it all unfold from my bedroom in Decatur, scrolling through thousands of comments from strangers who were angrier about my treatment than I'd ever allowed myself to be. There was something surreal about seeing my pain validated on such a massive scale, seeing the whole world confirm what I'd known but been afraid to say. What they did was unforgivable. Dad had been different since the night I told him everything. Quieter, more focused, like he was working on a complex repair that required all his attention. He still went to work at the garage every day, still made me breakfast every morning, still asked about my classes at the community college. But there was something else there now, something that hummed beneath the surface like electricity in a storm. "Saw the news about your friend," he said over coffee the morning after Victoria's death. "She wasn't my friend." "I know." He folded the newspaper carefully, creasing each edge with precision. "Sometimes the world has a way of balancing things out." There was something in his tone that made me look up from my cereal. Something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "Dad." "Yeah, baby girl?" You wouldn't." I couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the impossible thought that was taking shape in my mind. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His fingers were rough from years of mechanical work, warm and steady and reassuring. "All I've ever done is love you and try to keep you safe," he said quietly. "Everything else is just consequences catching up to people who forgot that actions matter." It should have been a comfort. Instead, it was terrifying. Because I was starting to realize that my gentle, hard-working father might be capable of things I'd never imagined. And the part of me that had died in those mountains, the part that no longer believed in fairness or justice or the natural order of consequences, whispered that maybe that was exactly what the world needed. 2 weeks later, Samantha was found dead in her car at the bottom of Lake Lanier. Another accident. Another coincidence. But I was beginning to understand that my father didn't believe in coincidences anymore. The phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. "Is this Laura Mitchell?" The voice was professional, tired, like someone who'd been working late and had more bad news to deliver. "Yes. This is Detective Rodriguez with the Atlanta Police Department. I'm calling about Isabel Chong. I'm afraid she's been found dead." I sat up in bed, fully awake despite the early hour. "What happened?" "We're still investigating, but it appears to be another suicide." "I'm sorry for your loss." Another suicide. 3 girls dead in 2 months, all apparently overcome with guilt about a camping trip gone wrong. The official story was holding barely, but cracks were starting to show. "Miss Mitchell, I know this is difficult, but we'd like to speak with you about your relationship with the deceased." "All 3 of them." I agreed to come in later that day, then hung up and sat in the darkness of my room, processing what this meant. Isabel was dead. They were all dead. Every person who had hurt me in those mountains, who had laughed at my pain and filmed my humiliation, was gone. And somewhere in this house was my father, sleeping peacefully like a man with a clear conscience. I found him in the kitchen the next morning, making scrambled eggs and humming an old gospel song Mom used to love. He looked exactly like he always had, tired from work, gentle around the edges, the kind of man who rescued stray cats and never raised his voice. "Morning, baby girl. You're up early. Isabel's dead." His hand paused for just a moment as he stirred the eggs, so brief I might have imagined it. "I'm sorry to hear that." "That's all 3 of them, Dad. Victoria, Samantha, Isabel. All dead." "Seems like they were carrying a heavy burden," he said quietly. "Guilt can eat a person alive." I stared at him, this man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to change a tire and balance a checkbook and stand up for myself. Who'd held me when I cried and celebrated every small victory in my life. "The police want to talk to me." "That makes sense. You were connected to all of them. Are you worried?" He plated the eggs and set them in front of me, then sat down with his coffee. "About what?" "About what they might ask. About what they might find." Dad looked at me across our small kitchen table, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, exactly, but acknowledgement. "Laura," he said slowly, "what do you think happened to those girls?" It was the first time he'd asked me directly, and I realized he wanted an answer. He wanted me to say it out loud. "I think someone killed them." "And who do you think would do something like that?" My throat felt dry. "Someone who loved me enough to make them pay for what they did." Dad nodded, like I'd solved a difficult equation correctly. "And if that someone exists, how do you feel about it?" The question hung between us like smoke. How did I feel? Scared, certainly. Horrified by the implications. But underneath all that was something else, something darker and more honest. Relief. "I feel like maybe the world is more fair than I thought it was," I whispered. "Good," Dad said, and his smile was soft and sad and final. "Because that's all I ever wanted for you. A world where people who hurt you face consequences." We sat in silence for a while, eating breakfast and listening to the morning news drone on about another tragic young life lost too soon. The reporters talked about the epidemic of guilt among young people, the pressure of social media, the devastating effects of bullying. They didn't talk about fathers who loved their daughters enough to become something terrible in service of justice. After breakfast, Dad walked me to my car. "When you talk to the police today, you just tell them the truth about what happened on that trip. Everything else." He shrugged. "Everything else is just people facing the natural consequences of their choices. What if they don't believe the suicide story? Then they'll investigate. And they'll find exactly what they're supposed to find, 3 young women who couldn't live with what they'd done. And if they investigate further?" Dad kissed my forehead, the same way he had every day since I was 5 years old. "They won't find anything to investigate, baby girl. Because a man protecting his daughter isn't a crime. It's just love wearing a different face." I drove to the police station with my father's words echoing in my head. The detective was kind, thorough, professional. She asked about our friendship, about the trip, about any signs that the girls might have been struggling with guilt. I told her the truth about the mountains. About the cruelty, the abandonment, the cameras. About 3 girls who thought my suffering was entertainment. "That must have been traumatic for you," Detective Rodriguez said. "I can understand why they might have felt guilty afterward." "They didn't feel guilty," I said honestly. "They felt proud." "But the suicide notes suggest otherwise." "What suicide notes?" The detective showed me photos. Handwritten letters found at each scene, expressing remorse and guilt about their treatment of me. Asking for forgiveness they knew they didn't deserve. The handwriting looked authentic. The paper looked aged. The words sounded like something each girl might have written. But I knew they hadn't. Because somewhere in Decatur, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and justice, was a man who could fix anything that was broken. Including a world that had failed to protect his daughter. I gave my statement and went home. Dad was working late at the shop, so I had the house to myself. I sat in my room and looked at the hidden phone one more time, scrolling through footage of 3 girls who'd thought they were untouchable. Then I deleted everything. Some stories don't need to be told. Some truths don't need to be shared. Sometimes love wearing a different face is exactly what the world needs, even if that world doesn't want to admit it. My father never confessed to anything. The police never found any evidence linking him to the deaths. As far as anyone knows, 3 young women took their own lives because they couldn't live with the guilt of what they'd done to their friend. And maybe that's true, in its own way. Maybe guilt really did kill them, just not the kind that comes from within. Dad still works at Mitchell's Auto Repair. I still go to community college, studying communications and building the travel blog I always dreamed of. We still have breakfast together every morning, and he still kisses my forehead before I leave. But sometimes when I catch him looking at me with pride in his eyes, I remember what he said about love wearing different faces. And I think about how far a father will go to balance the scales for his daughter. Some might call it vigilante justice. Others might call it murder. I call it love. The deepest, most dangerous kind of love, the kind that doesn't ask permission or wait for the courts or hope that karma will eventually catch up. The kind that acts. And in a world where 3 cruel girls could abandon someone to die and face no consequences, maybe that's exactly the kind of love we need more of. My name is Laura Mitchell, and this is the story of how my father taught me that sometimes the people who love us most are willing to become monsters to keep us safe. Even if we never ask them to. Even if we'll never be able to prove they did.